So my name is Orrin Ailloni-Charas. I am an anesthesiologist for those of you in medical profession, and the managing director of the Global Health Impact Fund for those of you in the startup innovative world. And for those of you both, this should be an interesting talk for you. I'm very excited to be joined by two very dear friends who have also started really interesting companies that our fund has backed. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Arup Roy-Burman, who is the CEO of Elemeno. And secondly, Dr. Neil Ray, who is the CEO of Raydiant Oximetry. So today we're going to talk to them about their journey from the exam room to the boardroom. So in other words, we want to know what makes these doctors tick. Why did they go off into the world of innovation and startups? And what, sort of what drives them and what lessons have they learned? So I'd like to start by first having the two of you say hi and introduce yourselves. So Arup, why don't you go ahead and get started?
Hi, great to be here. Appreciate the invitation. So I'm Dr. Arup Roy-Burman. I'm a pediatric critical care physician, former medical director of the ICU at UCSF Benioff Children's San Francisco. About 20 years of clinical practice between Stanford, Children's Oakland, Kaiser, and UCSF. Elemeno is a solution that we developed at UCSF out of our own pains. That was the pains of how do we get our staff on the same page and keep them there? Whether you're doctors, your nurses, your RTs, you're the frontline, whoever, getting the information, doing practices the same way. And it's a solution that was inspired by successes outside of healthcare in the consumer space about how devices such as these, our mobile devices, would enable us and make our lives so much easier by giving us the information when we need, what we need when we need it. And we asked the question of, why couldn't we get that kind of convenience in healthcare where the risks were so much higher? And so that was the impetus behind creating Elemeno, which I'm happy to share more of a little bit later on in this discussion.
Thank you, Arup. Neil, how about you? Why don't you introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. My name is Neil Ray. I'm a pediatric anesthesiologist, been in clinical practice for about 20 years, and came up with an idea to develop a better fetal monitor during labor and delivery from my clinical practice, taking care of women and children during the perioperative setting. One of the technologies we use in pediatric surgery looks at brain tissue oxygenation during cardiopulmonary bypass. And I thought to myself one day while in the OR, if we can monitor a baby's brain oxygen through a skull, why can't we monitor a baby's oxygenation through a maternal abdomen? And that's what started Raydiant Oximetry. We're developing a non-invasive fetal pulse oximeter. We've been around for about 5 years. We've got first in human data, breakthrough status from the FDA. We've raised about $10 million to date, have about $5 million of funding. It's been an incredible journey and excited to tell you more about that process.
Thank you, Neil. So guys, I wanted to start with something more, 30,000 foot. So you're both practicing medicine, you're taking care of patients and, presumably being fulfilled by that career. What drives you to want to start a startup? Did you want to do a startup and then find the idea? Were you inspired by something and felt, I just have to do this? Neil, why don't we start with you this time?
Sure. So I had this idea and I thought, oh my gosh, this is such a great idea. People are going to flock to me and want to take my idea and commercialize it. And that didn't happen. I never thought that I would have to sacrifice my career in medicine to develop my idea, because I always thought that someone else would develop it for me and I could be on a board, I could be an advisor, and I could help direct them. And that just didn't happen. So I came into a situation where if I didn't do it, no one else was going to do it. No one has tried to do this before and no one was going to do it. I tried for almost a year to build a team, but the reality was no one was willing to do it and no one was going to be able to do it as well as I could, because it was my baby, my idea, and I had that vision. And not everyone in the early stage necessarily shared the vision. So it wasn't so much that I wanted to be in a startup. I had to, if I was going to be able to go anywhere with this.
Right, right. You felt that compulsion. How about you, Arup? What was your experience like?
I think there's a similar story to Neil's, and one that has, I think, a lot of generalizability across healthcare. So, we in the ICU setting, high risk, high complexity care, great hospitals we're working at, and we're still seeing patients die from medical errors. Mistakes made by well-educated, hardworking, well-intentioned staff who simply couldn't pull the information they needed when they needed it. And we looked around and it's like, geez, we're still using binders and SharePoints and emails and posters above the toilet in the bathroom. I thought we're supposed to be the most advanced, medical technology and medical care in the world, but we're relying on these very archaic processes. And when we talked about the ideas of how we could use the same strategies that have been successful in the consumer space to be able to bring that information to us in bite-sized chunks on any device right at the point of care when we need it, we talked about it and people say, oh, well, that sounds interesting. Why hasn't somebody else done it? Well, nobody has. And it would be either saying, hey, you in the technology industry, go make this and make it the way you want it, or we do it and we lead it. If you look at the case in point of, say, the electronic healthcare record, I mean, that is the greatest manifestation of technology in healthcare today. And people hate it. There's very few physicians who love the EHR. It is full of force functions, click, click, clicks that have pushed us further and further away from the patient. You see the same reaction from nurses, but it's here. It's here to stay, and it is going to get better. But if you go and talk to, I remember a conversation I heard with Judy Faulkner, lead of Epic, I mean, the behemoth in the EHR industry. When she talks about who are her customers are patients, and they're large academic institutions. They're big hospitals. Not once did we hear the term, my customers are doctors and nurses or any of the people who are entering the data there. So my point is, the tech industry does not understand the complexities and intricacies of healthcare. And if we really want to drive the innovations we want, we as physicians need to take a role in leading those and making them happen.
Well, here for that. Definitely the GHIF, we definitely believe that physicians need to have a seat at the table. What I find interesting between the two of you is this common theme of here you are in practice, and it's almost like you get struck by lightning, right? This idea hits you and you say, it just doesn't make sense that we can't do this. And so you set out on this journey to make it happen. One of the themes we see a lot when we talk to doctors who are embarking on businesses is that running a business is very different than running a medical practice or being a great physician even. How did you go about, and let's start with you this time, how did you go about finding out how to do it? Like, did you seek out mentors?
Yeah.
What did you do? This is a big transition, right?
We have no training for this in medical school,
No.
nor in residency, nor in fellowship. And if you look around the hospital, frankly, nobody else knows how to do it either. When we look at hospitals in academic medical centers, you can, look to, are there innovation arms? Or are there other arms that are in other industry verticals? But unfortunately, the collaboration between the med schools and the business schools or the engineering schools, pretty minimal. Stanford probably does it the best, and that's why there's such a powerhouse in med tech. I came out of a place, UCSF, which had the advantage of being focused on healthcare alone. They're a healthcare powerhouse, but they don't have any of the insights that they lost when they separated from Berkeley back in the 60s. They don't have the business school. They don't have the engineering school. And when I looked around for guidance, all I could find is what they did over and over, which was we push devices out, we push drugs out, we push diagnostics out. And there was one little island that I found was UCSF had something called the Entrepreneurship Center, led by an MBA who actually was looking at the interests of the founder and about how you can take ideas and bring it out. So, seek out those people in business who are actually looking there for you, not just at the university's interests, but at the mutual interests of the founder and the university. And then start to leverage their network and your own network. For me, I can trace back the origins of this company to a discussion I had September 2015, when I invited a bunch of my friends who were outside of healthcare, including one of early stage at Yahoo, a guy who's builds chocolate factories all around the world, somebody else who's in SaaS with Oracle and with Salesforce, somebody else from Kaiser Technologies, bringing in this mix, talking about the idea, and that's there's a there, and we took it then through this entrepreneurship center at UCSF. It looked like it had legs. We made an application then to Y Combinator, became the first startup from UCSF to go into YC. That brought us additional outside mentorship. And I can't stress enough that we as physicians have tremendous insight into the problems and the pains and the solutions, but we have not been trained in how to build a business. And for that, lean on the community. I think one of the best pieces of advice I got was from Mark Larrett, the CEO of UCSF Med Center. Mark asked me, he goes, hey, Arup, what do you want to do? You want to be a CEO of a hospital, or, what is it? And I said, no, you know what? I want to start this company. I want to run with this idea, which he had seen. And he said, if you want to do that, get out of the university. He didn't mean that in a bad way. He said, get out, because we are just going to slow you down. Go partner with others in industry and make this happen, because they have the knowledge in how to do it. So it really is about a partnership. It's about being firm and confident in what you know, but also to be very transparent with what you don't know, and to be humble enough to bring in the expertise to help you in those gaps.
You're here. I think that's great advice. And I will say that I do agree with you. Stanford and UCSF have terrific programs to help entrepreneurs get started. We're now on the board of directors at the Health Hub, the UCSF Health Hub, and that's a terrific program.
Yes, which is a more recent piece, and that's great.
That's right.
Great learning from them.
Great learning from them. So definitely, if you're in this area, look into those programs. If you're in other areas of the country, there are a lot of resources. So Neil, you talked about in the beginning, you're hit with this great idea. Obviously, our fund has invested in you. We're a big believer in what you're trying to accomplish as a company. But how did you get people to believe in you and to support your efforts? How did you do that? And how did you start to build your team? What were your first steps?
Yeah, so the transition from physician to CEO was really about me seeing myself as a salesperson. And that's kind of sounds strange for a physician. We don't see ourselves as selling, right? We're doctors, but in all reality, we're always selling, right? When you interview for medical school, when you interview for residency, when you are getting consent from a patient to do a procedure, you're selling yourself and your knowledge, your capabilities, your judgment. And so a big paradigm shift for me was I'm always selling. I've always been selling, and I always will be selling. And once I got comfortable with the idea that I'm a salesman, even though I never realized it, it became easy to be a CEO because I have to sell a vision. And that's what I do 95% of my time. I manage investors, I manage the board, and I sell a vision. And it's when I got comfortable with that, that's how I was able to attract people, because if they believed in my vision, they wanted to be a part of it, because we believe that we're going to transform maternal fetal medicine, fundamentally transform it. So it was that shift in the way I thought about myself.
Right. Yeah, we think so too, Neil. We definitely think so. So Arup, something Neil said that I want to touch on is storytelling. And we've had a lot of conversations internally and on the podcast recently about the need to be a good storyteller and to create a connection between you and whoever your audience is, whether it's investors, whether it's the marketplace or potential customers. how do you think that that plays a role, and have you incorporated that into your practice?
It's all about stories.
Yeah.
That's what people remember. That's what people believe. You know, when you think about, you know, the roots of medicine, by and large, patients don't go to their doctor and ask, can you give me all the stats and all the data on X, Y, and Z? It's about, doc, you understand me, and I've shared, you know, what my concerns are. What do you recommend? It's about trust. It's about trust in a person. And, you know, that's probably why, you know, anecdotes have carried so much in medicine. I'm not saying that's good medicine through anecdotes, but those are the ones, it's the stories that people remember. And when we are sharing a vision of our business, it is about weaving it into a story about people. It's not just about dollars. It's not just about error reduction. It's about how this has saved real lives. It's about the individuals whose time it has saved. It's about how our customers, those individual people, have become successful. Because when you tell a story around people, then your audience can put themselves into those shoes and imagine themselves as that person. And then they can really buy into that story, put themselves in their shoes, and buy into that vision.
Right, right. So it's that connection, and you know, what's in it for them almost, you know, what are they, how does it be meaningful? It's hard to drive that home with the charts
Yeah, I think,
sometimes.
you know, honestly, it's not even like almost what's in it for them. It's like there has to be a what's in it for them.
Right,
For us, in the little bits of time that we have, it's like, hey, how is this relevant to me? How's it going to benefit me?
right. Excellent. I love it. So we're talking about now this journey, right? So we start as doctors, we end up, you know, in the boardroom as captains of industry, you know, on ringing the bell at NASDAQ, hopefully. So Neil, hiring people, right? Again, it's a whole different skill set than what we're used to in the operating room, and, you know, working in the hospital. You've got to hire peers who have core competencies that are literally different than yours because they need to complement you, right? How do you go about finding good people and then getting them to believe in that vision?
It's a lot of it's instinct. It's like dating, right? You're dating people. You're actually speed dating, and you've got to decide pretty quickly if this is someone you want to spend time with and get to know. You can do reference checks and all that kind of stuff, but it comes down to your instincts, and you know, there's a saying, fire fast, hire slowly. But the thing is, there's only so many hours in the day. You've also, especially in the Bay Area, you've got to be able to sell your vision to convince someone who's got seasoned experience to work for you at a salary reduction. So, you know, we're hiring signal processing people who could make $300,000-$400,000 working for Apple and Google. We can't pay that. You know, we can pay half of that. So you've got to be able to convince someone, not fresh out of college, but, you know, with 10, 15 years of experience, to work for you at half of what they would normally make, and that the upside in terms of stock options is going to be worth it, and the impact that they're going to make on society is worth, you know, taking that risk.
So it's
And
about
remember
aligning like the gains, right, also with the stock options. So they can
right,
see, you know, they can do very well if everything does very well, but otherwise they'll make a less than competitive salary.
exactly.
Right. And so that's harder because they have to sacrifice in the short term for the vision. So they really have to believe in you and believe in
Right.
what they're doing.
And want to work with you, right? Life is
Right.
short,
Right.
right? So
Right.
it's really like, can we spend more time with each other than we are about to with our spouses?
Right.
So
And
so
startups aren't corporate jobs, right? Where you come in, you sit at your desk, you take your calls, you know exactly what you're supposed to be doing. In a startup, you do a little bit of everything, right? If there's a fire, somebody's got to put it out, and there aren't that many people. So
that's
you
right.
can't wait for the fireman.
Right.
Um, has that been hard to get people also to be flexible in a startup or in the early days?
It's interesting. I think about that, and I think about it from the anesthesiology perspective. And I think anesthesiologists tend to be really good at being in startups because we're used to doing a lot of things, right? We're used to dealing with a lot of stakeholders. When we're in the operating room, right, we've got the patient's considerations, we've got the patient's family considerations, we've got the OR nurses, we've got the surgeon, we've got the preoperative cardiologist, we've got the post-op ICU doctor, we've got all these different stakeholders with their sort of vision on how you should be doing things, and we've got to manage it and be able to dabble in each of their languages. And so I think being an anesthesiologist really kind of trained me well for being in a startup.
Right. Good. Hey, Arup, one of the challenges of being at a startup is limited capital, limited resources, right? And so, as Neil said, you're going around, you're hiring people, you're really offering them below market wages, and sometimes, in the beginning, people aren't taking any wages. It's all about the potential gain. How challenging was that? And, what tips do you have for a doctor who's going to be involved, either starting a company or maybe just joining a company, how, so that they could make sure that they get properly compensated for what they do?
Well, I guess, when you're looking at the company or it's your own company, is thinking about, where's the benefit coming to this? If this is a benefit that is coming to, a very large group of a heterogeneous group of patients, is one that a lot of people can empathize with, you can sell on mission. If you're doing something that's incredibly esoteric, but can make money, then you're gonna be selling on money. So I think you need to think about what is it that you're trying to sell here. For most of us in healthcare, what we're doing can make a big impact. And if we're talking about coming through tech, like where we are on the cloud, it's something that's talking about making an impact at scale. We're talking about democratization of best practices, sharing from the knowledge rich to the knowledge poor or the resource poor. That type of vision is one that I think increasingly our global audience appreciates, especially here in the context of this pandemic, seeing the stress on the healthcare system, the importance of the healthcare systems, and the importance of these people who are delivering that healthcare. Whatever we can do to help them and help patients becomes really, personally heartwarming for you. And so I'd say, like in our company where we have 17 full-time and then a handful of part-time employees, every single one of them is sold on our mission. That's why they've come to us, because of the mission, and they love our mission. And then it's like, okay, what's enough comp that we can get you so you can meet your needs and you can stay comfortable? You're not here to make money. Now, certainly we grow as a business, you are going to make money, but the big seller on that for our staff is the mission. And when we look at, our growing workforce, the millennials that are coming through, they've got a different drive than a lot of people. And they're very transitory between jobs, because they're looking for something that is personally satisfying to them more than just the security of a job. So you've got to then, on top of it, you sell them on your mission, you've got to keep that mission vibrant and going for your team to be able to succeed.
Right. I imagine also that there has to be sort of a team consistency, right? The top guys can't be making a lot of money, right? It has to be throughout, and it has to be like, feel like you're all on the ship.
Yep.
Right. And I think another point to bring up is that because you're growing, right? You're always in a growth phase, at least in this part of your corporate career. You're always effectively under-resourced, right? Because wherever you are, you're trying to get somewhere bigger, and you need more money for that, right? So tell me, like, what has been your experience with raising capital? And like, again, if you're just coming out of, you get struck by lightning, have a great idea, and you have the resources to start putting it together, what would you advise somebody in terms of seeking out capital partners?
You want me to start with that, Orrin?
Okay, sure.
Sure. All right. And there's a question on the panel, how did I get my first funding? And I think they kind of go hand in hand. Our first funding came from the Neil Ray bank account. I took $150,000 of my savings to build a prototype and file a provisional patent. And honestly, no one's going to invest in your idea if you haven't invested in your idea. And that's what I was told. If I believe in so much my idea, then I have to demonstrate to the world how much I believe in it. So I had to fund my own first prototype, my own patent. With that, I did one sheep study. I got sheep data, and then I used that data to write a grant to the NIH. I got an NIH grant, and from there, I was able to raise friends and family. I felt comfortable to raise money from my family and my closest friends, and that's how it morphed. Other people may have had a different experience, but for me, I had to show that I had skin in the game, and I had to show that I was willing to put my reputation on the line with my inner circle of family and friends before anyone from the outside was willing to invest in me.
Right. Arup, what do you think? Do you have any
Yeah,
additional thoughts?
I totally hear Neil's story, and I've seen that story before. I came to a little bit different angle. I certainly had to put my own personal stake into it and my name into it. But the prototype that I built out within the university was one where I made the business case to the university. I didn't go for a grant. I went to the business angle, to the med center, and said, look, we do this. You give me the resources to build this out. I'm going to work with some volunteer engineers out of Salesforce. We're going to put this together, and this is going to increase our revenue with the number of referrals we get that the business we get in. And it's going to improve our safety here in the hospital. I was able to get them behind that. So the funds came, we proved the results. That got us our prototype going. And then when we made the pitch to YC was like, okay, great. We'd love to have you in here, but here's the catch. You're going to have to give up your job and you're going to have to work full time on this company. And so that was from the outside saying, look, if we're going to put our money in you on this idea, others have funded it to get you this far. If you really want to take the next step, we need to know that you're going to make your full wholehearted commitment to that. And I said, sure. And the rest has been history.
And Arup, what do you think today, so you're not practicing medicine and you're full-time on Elemeno, how does being a doctor influence your day-to-day as a business person, do you think?
Well, so for me, and being a doctor as being a, in an ICU, I think it's kind of like Neil in the OR, right? It's like, we're a hub of activity. We're working with so many different people with different hats. We've got to keep everybody happy and we've got to keep everybody coordinated. That's very much the same of what I'm doing here as a CEO in the company. And it's an understanding, I think in the ICU, our joke was that as the intensivist, we were the second best at everything. We weren't the best at anything, second best of everything. I mean, we knew more about surgery than anyone except the surgeons, or more about neurosurgery than anyone except the neurosurgeon, so that we could help to manage all of their patients. And that's how I like to see myself as a CEO, is that I want to surround myself with people who are smarter than me, and smarter than me in whatever specific task that they're driving, and then leave me the one to be able to manage and coordinate them. So I would say that's where my experiences in my specialty have really served me well here as a CEO. But being as a doctor, ultimately, when it comes to selling our solution, whether it is to investors or it's to customers, it gives a whole nother level of trust that this is coming from somebody who's really felt that pain and understands that pain.
Right. And validates the needs and so forth. And Neil, I bet you've had that experience too, that being a physician, being a pediatric anesthesiologist, explaining the value proposition of your solution to monitor fetal oxygenation has a tremendous credibility with potential investors and certainly down the road with customers. Has that been your experience?
It has. It's double-edged. On the one hand, I can tell the story, but then it's also, I've got to demonstrate that I'm the right person to lead this company. And there have been plenty of naysayers. Oh, you're a doctor, you've got no formal training, you don't have an MBA, you can't be CEO. So it's double-edged, but it's just all more reason for me to prove them wrong.
I think that's that's great. And I respect that. But it's a really important point. And, having known you for several years now, Neil, I totally have faith in you, but I can understand why an investor who doesn't know you, right, or you being more the hypothetical person, would say, you're a doctor and you're looking for $5 million to run a company. And that's a lot of money that I have a fiduciary responsibility to. This is concerning. And so maybe a really great question for, any doctors who are thinking, watching this talk would be, how do you create that confidence? Why don't you start, Neil, and then Arup will go to you.
Well, yeah. So you can't raise $5 million off the bat, right? Our seed round was $1 million. We ended up raising $1.5 million, and you've got to show good on a little bit of money that you've raised, and you build the confidence. The confidence from investors doesn't come overnight. It gets built with time. Right. And then so we raised the seed round $1.5 million. Then we raised a Series A of about $7.5 million. We'll be raising a Series B of 20 million. And my goal is to have demonstrated enough confidence and goodwill with the money that we've received, made enough progression where they have faith in writing a bigger check. And they may not. And ultimately, my journey as CEO might be short-lived. But if the board welcomes me continuing, I'm happy to do it. So I don't know what the future is going to be, but I'm very much passionate about making sure this technology gets to market, and I'll do as long as I can.
Very good. Neil, Arup, what do you think? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think when we're talking about the growth of a company, it's a marathon. It's not just a sprint. And you could think of it also as being a relay race, that there are different characters or different participants that are the lead at any one period of time, and they change over time. The personas that are there at the very early stages who can wear a lot of hats, as the company matures, start to become personas that are really specific on doing one thing and doing that one thing over and over and over. So the company will change over time. And I've always had the position with our investors and with our board that I'm the right person to lead this company right now. But when the time comes that we get big enough that there's a different type of expertise that would be better, I'm all for it. Because my goal is the same goal when we started, is to reach and impact as many people as possible worldwide. And I'm happy to shift my hat as that changes. And similarly on the, the fundraising side, I agree with Ray. Was this, this kind of, Neil, this, sorry, on this stepwise manner. We started with friends and family. Then we went to YC, then we did our Series Seed, and then we brought on additional investment. And, we had something I think is kind of interesting, I think, for the physician entrepreneurs here to know is that last year, we had several of our users, nurses and docs, who were saying, hey, how can I have a piece of this company too? And I'm a small investor, how can I do it? And angel investor Jason Calacanis had turned me on to the crowd. And so we opened up a raise on Republic and said, hey, this is an opportunity for you guys to all invest too. And we maxed it out at $1 million plus with 4,000 investors, rank and file, patients, doctors, and nurses who were like, yeah, I want to be part of this. And so we felt that, what we built out here is not just a company and a company that's growing on business on a mission, but we've actually got a following, a movement of investors who want to come behind this and advocate it for their own hospitals as well. So it's really exciting to be part of this. And I joke to many of my physician colleagues, I feel like I'm back in my ICU fellowship again, but instead of learning critical care medicine, which I loved, I'm learning this whole nother world of business, and it is so exciting.
So exciting. And that's a common theme I find in doctors who are getting into this and whatever as investors or as entrepreneurs, is that they love to learn, and this is just a different kind of learning. I imagine both of you got to a point in your career like I did where, you kind of knew what you were doing. You were pretty good at it, so there was learning, but not learning like we were used to. And so this was just, using those same muscles for different purposes, and very, very stimulating. So let's pivot a little bit, because we're now talking about growth, right? And there's a saying, that everybody, sort of everybody's wrong and you're right, and don't listen to anybody if they're telling you you're wrong. And then there's the more realistic, that you want to pivot, you want to fail fast and break things and pivot. So how was it as a, here you both are doctors, right? You're doing really important work. You're saving people's lives. Now you're a business person and you're growing, and you have a lot to learn, but you're still a really smart, both really smart guys. How was getting feedback? How was, being told the baby was ugly for you? And were you able to pivot? Were you able to take in the feedback that you got when it was, valuable feedback? Like, tell me, Arup, this time, let's start with you. How did you deal with that?
Sure. And Orrin, I just want to note that I had my calendar a little out of sync. I've got a sales call that I'm going to jump in just a minute, but yeah, the feedback piece, that's really interesting, because as doctors, and you're, hey, I'm director of the ICU, you're kind of expected everything, you're supposed to know everything and all this, which you don't. But it's and we come out of healthcare where it's such a old power hierarchy where the chancellor tells the dean, who tells the chair, who tells the chief, who tells the attendings, and all the way on down. And it's a hard system for feedback. And in business, you have to be open for that feedback. And one of the things for us as a product is we're all about the user. And it was suddenly listening to users. Suddenly I was listening to nurses and RTs telling me what's wrong with this thing that we put out. And you better listen to that because you want them to use it. And then hearing from folks in the business community. And I want to stress also that there's for us, it's a big belief in diversity. Diversity of backgrounds, not just in healthcare, diversity of whether it's race, whether it is economic background, educational background, because we're trying to serve, if you will, these masses of people that are caregivers. And I've come to learn about what's the right way to be able to say something to a diverse audience. It's not just in my generation or at my educational level, or that it's about, things as simple as, how do you deal with color for people who are colorblind and that kind of disadvantage, which never crossed my mind. And then it's about the kid out of college telling me, you don't have to do it that way because you've always done it that way in healthcare. What about this? And I'm first like, no. And then, you're right. Right. And it's been a journey for me to become more and more open to listening to that feedback and learning that feedback is what helps us to iterate and create a better business. We can't force our way of doing things down everyone's throats. We've got to open the tent and bring them in if we want to be able to succeed.
Right. To have scale. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. Thank you so much for joining us. I really enjoyed speaking with you today. Sorry about the confusion on the calendar, but we really appreciate your time.
No worries. I'll put my email on here. I invite any of you, if you want to have any other one-on-one conversation with me, please go ahead and write to me.
Okay, thank you. All right, Neil, stick around. We have a couple more minutes.
For sure.
So Neil, what do you think? Tell me about feedback. How thick has your skin gotten?
I think I started off with pretty thick skin. I had the fortunate situation where I've been told my baby's ugly for the last 30 years of my life.
That's for people, that's a metaphor.
Yeah, right? It's a metaphor. I think I went to a college where you get a 60% and it's an A, when in high school you're used to getting 100% and it's an A. And you go through medical school thinking you're going to fail every single test you took, and you somehow managed to get through it. And residency, you think you're doing a good job taking care of patients, and you're getting your rear end kicked every day, being told how awful you are, and you're going to be the worst doctor ever. So I think, at the time it was really challenging and soul sucking, but you develop a thick skin. So I think I was well prepared for the entrepreneurial journey, just through circumstances of how I grew up. So
have you had any pivots in the business?
Small pivots, initially. So our technology, addresses mom and baby during childbirth. And we go back and forth in terms of what kind of claims we want to go after. Are we trying to reduce C-section rates? Are we trying to improve the diagnosis of fetal distress? And so I would say that they're nuanced pivots, not so much core technology pivots, but more nuanced. What kind of
Right.
claims do we go after? What kind of clinical trial design do we go after? That small things.
Right, right. So speaking of, reducing C-sections and things like that, we call ourselves at the venture fund early stage healthcare investors, and you're an early stage healthcare company, but it's absolutely true and appropriate to say that we are impact investors. Not necessarily in the traditional sense of, environment and, diversity, but like in all the things that energy independence that people talk about with respect to impact, but healthcare is impact, right? So one area that I haven't seen anything done well yet, although I'm sure people are working on it, is how do you qualitatively and quantitatively, describe impact? Have you encountered more impact investors, people who weren't really necessarily healthcare savvy? And if you did, or if you plan to in the future, how would you be able to quantify your impact? And this was actually going to be a harder question for Arup, because I think it's pretty slam dunk for you, but I'm interested in your answer anyway.
So the term impact, I would say, is double-edged, because in the venture world, impact investing can also be perceived as philanthropy. Remember, venture capitalists they have a fiduciary responsibility, have a return on investment for the capital that they deploy. And there's this idea that impact investing isn't going to give you a venture return. And that's simply not true, but you have to do a lot of education. And the way you do it is by quantifying the impact, as you mentioned. We can reduce, 300,000 C-sections a year in the United States. We could potentially save 1,000 babies from birth injury each year in the United States. So it's actually important to quantify impact if you're going to be able to get investors comfortable with investing with that mindset.
And just since we didn't really go into it earlier, Neil, in really high level, why do we need to measure fetal oximetry?
Yeah, so right now, when a mother goes into labor, we use a technology called fetal heart rate monitoring to assess the status of the fetus. The problem with that technology is that it essentially has the accuracy of a coin toss in predicting fetal distress. It's a technology, we're looking at the wrong vital sign for the baby to figure out if the baby's tolerating the birthing process or not. And so the vital sign we want to look at is baby's oxygen saturation, but there's never was a way to do it non-invasively. Other companies have tried to measure the baby's oxygen saturation during birth by putting in a probe through the vaginal canal into the cervix and on the baby, but there are problems with that approach, as you can imagine. We're able to do it non-invasively. So I think people have always recognized that if you could measure the baby's oxygen saturation, that would be a very useful vital sign. It just wasn't technically feasible until recently.
Right.
And we're taking advantage of the technology developments that have happened in the tissue optics space.
Right. And so by measuring that, you get a better, more accurate sense of the baby's degree of stress. And therefore, the right babies get C-section. Babies that don't need it don't get C-section, which reduces morbidity, mortality, and cost.
Absolutely.
We are running out of time. So what I'd like maybe is to end with some thoughts for the future entrepreneurs in the audience. What are some lessons that you've learned as a doctor turned corporate magnate?
Yeah, I'm always in sell mode, and you feel like when you're in sell mode, you have to put on this persona. But you also have to be humble. You have to be authentic and not afraid to ask for help. Arup touched on this earlier, but really, to be successful, you have to build your network. You have to know when to ask for help, and you have to have a network of people who are willing to help you and who can guide you, because not everyone has the answers. So you have to be comfortable admitting you don't know how to move forward in this specific aspect. I need help. And I think one of the great things about GHIN, Global Health Impact Network, your fund, is that you guys got a tremendous network. I feel like I could email any of you guys, Gary, yourself, anyone, and so many people where you could connect very quickly to the right people within the network. And so I think anyone who's on this call, they're on their right step because now they've got access to the network as well. And with a couple emails, you can pretty quickly get to the answer, from a trusted source.
Thank you for the shameless plug. I did not put you up to that, but I'll send you a check for $5. Last question. Would you recommend entrepreneurship for a doctor who gets the bug, or would you say, don't do it?
I wouldn't say either. It's really an individual's decision, but this is how I think about it. I work twice as hard for half the money as I did during residency. And the thing about residency, my residency was 4 years long. I knew when it was going to end. Entrepreneurship, it's a residency without a finish time. Your journey could be 3 years, it could be 10 years, maybe it never ends. And so you can't think about it in terms of a journey with an endpoint. You have to do it for the love of the actual job. It's hard. In some ways, I could be considered selfish for being an entrepreneur. It's taxing on my family financially, time-wise. I don't probably spend as much time as I would like to with my kids. Literally, I'm working twice as hard as I would as a full-time anesthesiologist. So it's not for everyone. And it's a really, you really have to be honest with yourself before you make that decision to plunge into it.
And I'd add to that, be passionate about what you're doing and surround yourself with people that you enjoy spending a lot of time with, because you're going to spend a lot of time with them.
That's right. More than your spouse or your kids.
Right. That's what you said earlier. Neil, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this talk. I hope everybody else enjoyed it. Good luck. We're watching and we're here to help whenever you need it.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to the next topic today. Thank you, everybody.